Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. If you guys are watching, fantasy content kind of this early on in the offseason, pre-draft, before normal regular fantasy drafts are kicking off, then I'm guessing a decent amount of you guys are playing in best ball leagues. And because of that, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some of the best running back targets in best ball leagues prior to the draft. I feel like there are lots of running backs to target who you can get, really solid deals on, where now they're going, 2, 3, 4 rounds later than they likely will be going in a few months. I think a lot of that is looking at some of the rookie running backs, their potential draft capital, and then also some of these other running backs who there may be, some fear that there are going to be other running backs brought in via the draft. And if you kind of just look at those teams' breakdowns, where you think they're going to spend their draft capital, you can kind of get a head start and, get those players at a really solid discount. So let's jump into the first player, and it is going to be a rookie running back, and that is Breece Hall. Right now in best ball drafts, he's kind of going in that round 4, round 5 range. And I feel like, moving forward, his value is basically guaranteed to either rise or stay the same. Barring some kind of freak injury, which obviously could happen to any player, I just don't see how his ADP is going to fall into round 6, round 7. Because right now, looking at his draft capital, it looks like he's lined up to be either a late first or early second round pick, and that's for the NFL draft. And if he lands in the right landing spot, I'm guessing for fantasy, he will be, picked in the first 2 rounds. The last 2 seasons, we've seen at least one running back, go that early. 2 years ago, it was CEH. Obviously, that was bad, but overall, that was just kind of bad process. No one really viewed CEH as the best running back in that class. But because he landed on the Chiefs, that's why his value got pushed up. I think Breece Hall is pretty much the unanimous RB1. Some people may argue Kenneth Walker, but still, if Breece Hall is the first running back off the board on a good team, just like we saw with Najee, where he got, very high draft capital and then was picked very highly in fantasy drafts, he obviously produced. So I think a similar thing could happen with Breece Hall. So if he lands on the Buffalo Bills in the first round, you can slot Breece Hall in as a, mid-second round pick, probably at the latest. And then if he lands in a not so great landing spot, his ADP will probably stay where it is right about now. If you're looking at a guy like Travis Etienne, prior to his injury, if you're looking at his draft capital, he goes, what was it? It was first round, but he goes to the Jaguars where they had James Robinson, who was already productive. He was still being picked in fantasy drafts like round 4, round 5, even though it was cloudy. I think Breece Hall is probably a better prospect. You could, have an argument the other way, but I just think this is a great opportunity to be ahead of the curve on the player who is likely going to be the first running back off the board in this 2022 draft class. The next player I want to talk about here is my guy, Playoff Lenny, Leonard Fournette. I've been heavily targeting him in basically every single best ball draft that I am doing. Right now, he's kind of going in that round 4 range. People, I think, are starting to wake up and coming around on Leonard Fournette, and I think that value is just going to continue to rise basically all the way up until the season. Right now, when we're looking at Fournette's situation, you look at that Bucs roster, it is an even better situation than it was in 2021. In 2021, we saw him finish as the RB4 in points per game. Ronald Jones is gone. Early in the season, Leonard Fournette was not the clear number 1 guy. They went into week 1 with Rojo as the lead back. Rojo, as he does, fumbles, botches things. Leonard Fournette takes over. They do have Giovanni Bernard back. You may think he's going to kind of cut into Leonard Fournette's receiving role. He was there last year, did get some receiving down work, but Leonard Fournette was still heavily involved in the receiving game, averaged 6 targets per game. I think the main concern here would be if the Bucs go out and draft a running back, with one of their earlier picks. I really wouldn't be surprised if they did draft a running back in this class, but if I had to, put money on where it was, I'm guessing it's going to be in the later rounds, more of a depth option, a guy to kind of fill in that RB3 role, because I do not think they trust Keyshawn Vaughn there. When you're just looking at the Bucs roster, they definitely have much more pressing needs on the defensive side of the ball. You've got Tom Brady back, you're in a win-now mode, and you just signed Leonard Fournette to a 3-year, $21 million contract. I just think they're going to spend those draft picks elsewhere, and if they do not bring in another running back, I would be shocked if Leonard Fournette is not a top 2 round pick, in a few months from now. So I'm definitely stocking up on all the Leonard picks, before that price gets too high. Another running back who had a resurgence last year is James Conner. And right now he's being picked kind of in a similar range to Fournette, probably a little bit later, rounds like 4 through 6. He finished as the RB9 in points per game last year, and it looks like he is lined up to be the Cardinals' workhorse, just like he was later in the season in 2021. He may be giving up some receiving work to a guy like Benjamin, but in 2021, when Chase Edmonds was out, Benjamin was still on that roster, and James Conner was a dominant 3-down back for fantasy. There may be some concern about them, bringing in someone from the draft similar to Fournette, but when you're looking at their draft picks, they only have 3 selections in the first 5 rounds, and they also have some clear needs on the defensive side of the ball. Plus, their wide receiver room is looking very bare. So Connor's also on a 3-year, $21 million contract. I just don't see why you would hand out that money to James Conner and then go out and spend a premium pick on a running back. So I expect him to hold on to that workhorse role and gain value throughout this offseason. The next player I'm going to talk about is actually someone who shared a backfield with James Conner last season, and that is Chase Edmonds. This one I don't feel as confident in, but right now he's being picked in like rounds 9, 10, 11, kind of getting into that double-digit round range, and he's being picked around, some locked-in RB2s on teams and kind of handcuff running backs. I definitely understand this Dolphins backfield is basically wide open, but even though it is wide open, I do think it is likely safe from the NFL draft. The Dolphins currently only have 4 picks, and it's rounds 3, 4, and then 2 7th-round picks, so not a lot of premium draft capital there. And so I expect Edmonds to be competing with Raheem Mostert and Myles Gaskin for touches. I do think this will be a committee, but I think Edmonds is clearly the best receiving back. He's going to lock down that 3rd down role. And then I think he can also, work out a decent share of the carries. The Dolphins have an improved offensive line. They've brought in Tyreek Hill. There's going to be more touchdown opportunities for this team. And I just think Chase Edmonds is going to be a solid, later round running back target who's going to be able to slot in as like a fantasy, probably back end RB2 if he just gets some touchdown luck, which is something that he did not get last year with James Conner kind of vulturing all those TDs. And the first of the 2 that I'm going to talk about is going to be Rachaad White. There's just a lot of value later in best ball drafts with these rookie running backs. There's no guarantee they're going to go out and get an opportunity, to be the RB1 in their first season, but the cost is just so low, and he's being picked, around just locked in backups. So I think if you're drafting Rachaad White in best ball, you're hoping he's picked in like the first 4 rounds. Probably you're hoping for, day 2 at the latest, so first 3 rounds. But I think when you're looking at the back end of these drafts, he's probably the only running back that I think has legit, 3-down potential. He has the workhorse size to get the early down carries. We know he's a very, very solid receiving back. And we've seen, the last few years, these running backs who are picked later in the draft can totally make a fantasy impact in year 1. Just looking back at 2021, we saw Elijah Mitchell and Michael Carter. Those guys were both solid startable options for fantasy, throughout the season. And then the last rookie here is going to be Zamir White. And I'm kind of surprised that he's someone I am targeting because when we're looking at him as a prospect, prior to his stellar combine, where I think he upped his draft stock, I didn't really love him as a prospect because I do think he is, more of an early down guy, doesn't have that 3-down potential, but he is being selected in like the round 17 to 19 range, which is just absolutely wild for someone who could be a day 2 pick. I do think he could be picked in the first 3 rounds. And at this point in best ball drafts, that round range that I mentioned, you're looking at running backs who don't even have the RB2 spot locked up. So I'm totally willing to take a swing on a guy like Zamir White, who I think could be an early down back, in a committee offense or a committee running back room from day 1. So I really like the value there on Zamir White. And that is going to wrap it up for some of my favorite best ball running back targets. I'm going to talk about the wide receivers in my next video, but let me know what you guys think about these targets down below in the comment section. And if you guys have some other players that you're targeting, let me know down below also. I'll make sure to get back to every single person. But thank you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.